Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Karen Orlemans, and I am excited about the Word of God, and I'm hoping that by presenting these videos to you that it will also inspire your passion for studying God's Word and going deeper into what He has for you today. I'm really thrilled to be bringing to you this particular video, which is based on my tour that I did of Israel. I was very privileged to be able to join Lisa Harper's Back Porch Theology Goes Home tour just recently in March, and it was the most amazing trip of my life, and I've done a bit of travel. They often call going to Israel as the fifth gospel because it brings the Word of God to life. Now, I understand that that's not possible for everybody to do, and it is incredibly expensive to be able to travel, go there, do the tours. So I'm hoping that by bringing this tour to you today, that it will give you a little bit of an insight of what it looks like and what the area and the context looks like. And I want to present in this the photos that I took, but also what the just the context, and to give you a little bit of insight into the context of the Bible and how we can get so much more out of the Word of God by understanding just the physical environment of where some of these stories took place. So let's get started. From Australia, I flew via Abu Dhabi. It was quite a long flight, 24 hours, and that's because we had to fly around a major storm. But Abu Dhabi airport is really interesting with that mosaic ceiling, and I loved watching the sunrise as I landed. We then landed at Tel Aviv, and the airport is just delightful in Israel to just get in there, the artwork on the wall, just reflecting the archaeology of the place. We stayed the first night at the Guy Beach Hotel in Tiberias. We took a bus up to Tiberias and we stayed at the Guy Beach Hotel, which is right on the Sea of Galilee. So it was really lovely to just be able to stand there in the morning, that second photo, and watch the sunrise over the Sea of Galilee. The tour went via buses, obviously, and this was our bus group. I got to know these people over the next 8 days we spent together, and we just really enjoyed their company. I was so blessed to be with these people. There were 4 buses altogether in our group, and at the end of the slideshow I have a photo of the entire group. Day 1, we went all around the coast, the northern coast of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is also called Lake Gennesaret, Lake Kinneret, as it is known in Israel primarily today. But it's kind of a political attribute depending on which author you're reading at the time. And this was my beautiful bus partner, Alyssa, and we got on really well together, and we just were able to just enjoy each other's company. It was really lovely to be able to share this time with her. The first place that the tour took us to was, in fact, to Mount Arbel. Now, Mount Arbel does not have a biblical significance, but it does give you an amazing overview of the area. And you can see there the shore of Lake Galilee, and I'm going to use my pointer, so you can see the shore of Lake Galilee right there. And this is Capernaum right here. So, and then it goes all the way around. And this is the Golan Heights are on the other side. So, which we also visited. So Mount Arbel, not biblically significant, but it does give you a good overview of the area. Mount of Beatitudes. What you will discover if you go to Israel is that every single place has a church. That is, every single place that is biblically significant has a church on it. In this case, this is the Church of the Beatitudes on the Mount. Again, the Mount of Beatitudes, it's on the foreshore of the lake of the sea, on the foreshore of the Sea of Galilee. I'm going to keep switching between those words, sea and lake. It is actually a lake, and it is an inland lake, and it is fresh water, hence it's not a sea. So it has that view over the Sea of Galilee. And this was a place where we had some teaching. Lisa Harper did some talk. We worshipped there with Jonathan Allen, and it was Dr. Jim Howard who also did some teaching there, although not on the photo. From there we went to Capernaum. And of course, Capernaum is the center of Jesus' ministry. It is here that he chose to begin his teachings. He did more miracles. I think Dr. Jim Howard said 85% of the miracles that we read about in the Bible were done in the region of Capernaum than anywhere else within that New Testament, those 4 Gospels. On the top right-hand side, you will see the remains of the 4th century synagogue, the original basalt stones, which you can just see here, and down the bottom here, were visible underneath, were from the synagogue in the 1st century that Jesus would have attended in that place. In the bottom left here, right in the center, this is believed to be the house of Peter, and it is in fact the remains of the earliest known church in the area. This black area that you see over the top of that is in fact the base of another church which was built over the top. So you can go in the church and take a photo through the glass floor to see the top down, but I thought this was quite a good photo. So that's the earliest known church, believed to be the house of Peter, where Jesus probably may well have lived and done the miracle of the through the roof of the house. St. Peter's Primacy is the name of another church, and it is called that because this is where they believe that Jesus was reinstated after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So it's also said to be the place where Jesus called Peter and Andrew and James and John, and as you can see from this image here, where Jesus fed the 5,000. These rocks that you see, and they go right into the church, are in fact places where boats were anchored onto, and the holes of the anchoring actually remain, and this is the Sea of Galilee. We were really privileged to visit this boat, the Galilean boat at the museum, found in 1986. This boat was excavated. It is, and it has been dated to the 1st century AD. So at the time of Jesus. Of course, it is not one of Jesus' boats, but it is from, because there were more than just the 2 fishermen. There were a number because it was a major fishing port. But it shows you what a boat looked like at that time, and it was just a real privilege to be able to go to this, to see the boat. And we also had the opportunity to meet with the archaeologist, the archaeologist who discovered the boat. Magdala, this one, wow, this place was amazing. The first photo is the street along the waterfront of Magdala where Jesus walked, and where it is thought he may have healed the woman with the flow of blood. And that's the 3rd picture that you see there. It's a beautiful original painting on the wall of the church that is actually built over the streets, although the street continues outside the church. Photo 2 is of the synagogue of Magdala that was excavated in early 2000s. So just amazing to find that and to realize that this is probably a place that Jesus attended. Obviously you can't go inside, but you can look around it. Day 2, so that was all on day 1. It was a very busy day, and each day was so full. The photo there is of myself and my bus and roomie, Alyssa, as we're overlooking Beit Shean. We went back to Capernaum in the morning for more teaching. Dr. Jim Howard taught us on the miracles of Jesus and the miracles that Jesus performed at Capernaum as the start of his ministry. And he just made some really good points about why Jesus chose that. And if you're curious to know more, I encourage you to listen to the Lisa Harper's Back Porch Theology podcast of the Monday in April, the third Monday in April, where they actually talk about this particular teaching that he did. And so we came to Nazareth. Oh my word. This is actually a historical reproduction village, and it was incredible to just be able to visit that and to hear some of the stories and get some more insights into the village and into Nazareth itself. Nazareth itself today is a modern town. This little space right here in the middle is as part of an original farm area. They have rebuilt some of these structures and buildings to try and show us what it looked like in the time of Jesus. Now, there are two things that really stood out for me here and that I've captured on the photos. The first of all is the olive press, which is photos 2 and 3. That this was an authentic replica of a first century oil press, which would do 3 pressings: the pure oil for the anointing, the second oil was used for food, and then the third oil, which was pressed out. The first oil was pressed out of the third picture. The second and third oils were pressed out of the second picture, was used for lighting lamps. It was probably the most impure oil. But also, did you realize that the word for oil press is Gethsemanim, from which word we get the name for the Garden of Gethsemane. So it means oil press. It means an oil pressing. So, when Jesus died, when Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane and wept, you could see he was being pressed so hard for what he knew was going to happen. And of course, Gethsemane was, the Garden of Gethsemane, as you'll see later in my photos, is in fact a garden of olive trees. In the synagogue, the first photo on the left, reenactment, they pointed out they did a reenactment of Jesus leaving Nazareth for the last time, which was, of course, with the stories in Luke chapter 4, verse 16 to 30. And in that reenactment, they pointed out that what really offended the Jews was not necessarily that Jesus was claiming to be a prophet or his overt suggestion that he was the Messiah. No, it was that he was coming as Messiah not just for the Jews, but also for the Gentiles. And to a people oppressed by the Romans, this was heresy. So I invite you to just go back and read that chapter and have another look at that and really try and understand, dig into the word and try and understand that from that passage. Then we went to Megiddo. Megiddo was another archaeological site, possibly where Solomon, and definitely where Ahab kept his horses, and hence you see the horse artwork there, beautiful artwork there. It is also where Josiah was killed, which we can read in the books of Kings and Chronicles, and where Ahaziah was killed by Jehu. So an interesting place to visit for sure. The original stairs of Megiddo you can see on the left hand side there. So original, I'm talking dating back to we're looking 700 years before the birth of Christ. And the other two pictures are the water tunnels of Megiddo, which we know were built by Ahab to ensure the water security at the time of the Assyrian threats. So just incredible to realize that they were dug out by hand. Then we went to Beit Sham. This is the town. It's what you look at now is the Roman remains, archaeological remains of the town. There's very little that remains of the original town itself. But on this place is where there was the town of the Philistines, and it's the town where Saul and his sons' bodies were hung on the wall by the Philistines. So that's the biblical significance of this place. We come now to day 3, and the photo here is of myself and Alyssa on the Sea of Galilee, and that was the first thing we did, is we had a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. The boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. Now the boat you see there is a very much larger but very similar replica boat to what it would have looked like at the time of Jesus, but like about 4 or 5 times as big as the original, as you saw in that earlier photo. What was exciting about this particular day was that our whole group went on 2 boats, because we couldn't fit all in one boat, but we went into what is the area of lake of the Sea of Galilee that is called the Deep, and in the Deep the 2 boats were lashed together, and there Lisa Harper did a beautiful teaching for us, hanging over balustrade there, as you can see, and she taught on Peter and his walk with Jesus. And again, I encourage you to listen to the 3rd Monday in April, her teaching on the Back Porch Theology, because again, there is a bit of a chat about that as well in that time. And we also did incredible worship. That was really the thing I think that blew me away. That was a highlight for me on this particular day, was the worshiping that we did with Jonathan Allen. And we sang at the top of our voice, "I'm going to sing in the middle of the storm." Just that declaration of faith in God. That was right there. We then went to the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights were held by Syria. They are on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, but since 1981 they've been annexed to Israel. We visited Syrian bunkers there, and a monument with the inscription which you see on that first photo, "From here you look 7 times greater." A stone that commemorates the bravery of the kibbutz just in the area down below from the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights overlook the land of Naphtali, and what you see in the distance there on the 3rd photo is in fact Nimrod, the city, what the remains of the city of Nimrod. And Dan, from there we went to Dan, and Dan, there were 2 important areas here. That photo was on the Abrahamic Gate, and it dates back to 1750 BC, and it is from a Canaanite city. And the reason it's called the Abraham Gate, obviously not all of this structure is like the area in the middle there is what is keeping that together. It's all been shored up with bricks, with wood and bricks and things. This is the remains of the gate. And then this structure over the top has been built to protect it. And the reason it's called the Abrahamic Gate is because the Bible actually mentions this gate in Genesis 14 verse 14, where it says, "And when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan." And so it's called the Abraham Gate. But Dan, of course, we know is, it actually also is important for the time of Jeroboam. And we went to this 2nd gate that you see here, and the city, the foundations of the city that were uncovered, dating back to that time of Jeroboam. It's where he put up the golden calf that you can read about in 1 Kings 12. Here they actually found a stone carving with a reference to the house of David. So very important, and has been dated back to a time, probably Jehoshaphat, but certainly we know that biblically it dates back further than that. And then Caesarea Philippi. The cave and the niche at the back that you see there, where all the people are standing in front of it, were actually for the god Pan. And in the time of Jesus, when he visited this place, there were temples here, and where those people are, the remains of the Roman temples and the temple built by Herod in honor of Caesar were. This was covered in temples. This whole area was covered in temples, 3 temples in a row, I think it is. Now, the biblical context, of course, for Caesarea Philippi is that this is where Peter made his declaration of the Christ in Mark 8, verse 27. I can just imagine, and you have to realize this is almost 60 kilometers north, so 3 days walking, almost 3 days walking north of Capernaum. So it's quite a long way for Jesus to have walked. But there's a reason why Jesus walked all this way, and I'll mention it shortly. But I can just imagine Jesus standing there here on the foreshore of this water which flows out from here, and standing here on the foreshore here and speaking to Peter and his disciples, saying, "Who do you say I am?" Who do the people say I am? And then Peter coming out with his confession, and then him turning to Peter and saying, this has been a revelation of the Holy Spirit. The Father has revealed this to you. But I'm going to build my church on you, Peter, as the little rock, and the gates of hell, and sweeping his hands towards where all these temples were, the demonic temples were, and sweeping his hand and saying, the gates of hell will not be able to stand against you. One of the reasons why Jesus may have walked all this way into Caesarea Philippi is that it is also at the foot of Mount Hermon, and Mount Hermon is believed to be one of the possible sites. There are 2. This is one of the ones that has the strongest indication. Mount Hermon being the possible site for the Transfiguration, which of course happened in Mark chapter 9. So you could see why Jesus would have walked into this area. And then we went to the New Cape Lookout. Now, this is the site of this lookout, marks one of the entrance gates to the Golan Heights today. It is directly across the Sea of Galilee from Tiberias. And the biblical significance is that this is the region of the Gerasenes. The Sea of Galilee is in the background, as you can see. And it is probably the site where Jesus healed the man with the legion of demons, the narrative of which you can find in Luke 8, verse 26 to 39. As he threw the pigs over into the sea. From there, we went to Yardenit in the Jordan River, just below the Sea of Galilee. The waters here are clean and generally quite clear. This was traditionally the site where Jesus was baptized, but of course we now recognize that that is not correct. However, it is still an incredibly popular site for Christians to be baptized, something that many of our tour did when they were in Israel. And that was day 3, and we went on to day 4, and we made our way to Jerusalem. And so on the road to Mount Carmel, there was a grave that had been dated back to that Second Temple period in Israel, very similar to the grave in which Jesus would have been buried. Note that the stone that is rolled in front, or just off to one side, of a quite small square opening, and it was a small. It could be rolled back and forth, so more bodies could be added to the tomb. So you can imagine this would have been very similar to the tomb in which Jesus was buried. And then we went to Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel is actually a region with at the center a 550-meter peak, on top of which is now a monastery, the Stella Maris Monastery, and it provides an excellent view over that whole region. Now, tradition has it, in fact, that Elisha lived in the caves in the foothills of this particular region, so I thought that was interesting to learn. And excavations have suggested that the site of the altar, because it wasn't just Elijah who built an altar, but that altar was actually built previous to that, and that there's evidence of multiple altars on the side. And so it's the altar which Elijah rebuilt is a little way down from the top of the highest peak. And this, if you read the story in 1 Kings 18, actually accords with that story. Now the brook Kishon is somewhere around to the left-hand side of the altar, and the slaughter of the priests of Baal happened there because the altar would have been considered holy to the Lord, and so you wouldn't have slaughtered them at the altar. The slaughter happened at the Wadi Kishon, or the brook Kishon. And in verse 41 of the chapter, we actually note that it is after the slaughter that Elijah goes back up Mount Carmel, and that's when he goes to the top of Mount Carmel with his servant to pray, and he sends his servant to go to the very top to look out towards the sea. And I've included that photo here. The Mediterranean Sea is just over here on the other side there, and it's only just really visible from that highest point. So you can see how the story, how this environment and this context provides such an understanding, a further understanding of the story. Caesarea by the Sea, or Caesarea Maritana, is now a national park, and it was built in fact by Herod in about 22 BC. Here he built a very vast harbour, which I'll show you on the next slide, and many other large buildings, including an amphitheatre that you can see here. Though much of this has now actually been restored, and it's actually only the lower rows around here that are actually part of the original. It was actually a major Roman centre and had replaced Jerusalem as the civilian and military capital and official residence of the governors such as Pilate and Felix, and we read in Acts chapter 24. Now the biblical significance of Caesarea, as we found out from Dr. Jim Howard, who did a fantastic teaching here, is that this is the place where Cornelius lived in Acts chapter 10, the Roman army official who called Peter after a dream, and it became a turning point both theologically and spiritually, because the Holy Spirit came upon Cornelius and his family even as Peter was talking to them about the gospel, the very first Gentiles to be filled with the Holy Spirit. And from here, the gospel would be spread to the rest of the world. And the inset photo, of course, is of myself and Lisa with the Mediterranean Sea in the background. Now the top photo here shows the harbour buildings on the far left and the place where the horse races would have been held here at the front. And then the photo is taken from the promontory just off here onto one side where Herod's palace was built. And the bottom photo is of the aqueduct that brought water from the foot of the Carmel Ranges, so that photo that I showed you in the last place, to Caesarea. Our first stop in Jerusalem was in fact the model city, built in the place of the Shrine of the Book, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, which shows how Jerusalem would have looked during the time of Jesus, with the temple dominating the space. The Pool of Siloam, which you can't really make out, is over here just to the left, and of the temple, and the Pool of Bethesda is off to the right. The four-towered building here in this little one here is the Antonia Fortress, which housed the Roman garrison and is said to have been the place where Pilate condemned Jesus to death, although there's some discussion about whether it was there or in Herod's palace at the time. Evidence of Roman occupation, though, by soldiers remains in the foundations uncovered by archaeology, and it is now the site of the Church of the Condemnation, which we did visit, and you'll see that later in the slideshow. From there, we went to the Shrine of the Book, where the Dead Sea Scrolls are held, and the Aleppo Codex. Now, it was illegal to take photos inside the building, though in fact much of what was on display is in fact facsimile, because to have old documents on show all the time will cause their disintegration further and further due to light. But it was a great place to visit and to understand the findings of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Aleppo Codex. The Dead Sea Scrolls, just briefly, they were discovered in Qumran which we visited in 1947. The shrine houses both the Isaiah scroll, and it's important because the Isaiah scroll is the oldest complete copy of the book of Isaiah, dating back from the 2nd century BC. It is one of the most intact of the scrolls that they found at Qumran, and it is important for our Bibles, and that it is almost entirely consistent with the book of Isaiah that is found in our Bibles, speaking to the truth and veracity of the Word of God as we still have it today. It follows the Masoretic text, and it in fact includes all of the 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah. From there we went to Mount Scopus, and there's another photo of myself and Alyssa, with old Jerusalem in the background, and of course the dome, the current Muslim dome, dominates the old town, and there's another mosque there. This old mosque, this is where the Western Wall is. Right there on that space is where the original temple would have been. And this is the old wall of Jerusalem, but most of this was rebuilt, dates to 500 AD, so built by the Ottoman Empire, and does not date back from the 1st century AD, or before that, for the Second Temple period, we'll call that. And although some of the very lowest stones do date back from that period. Day 5, we stayed at the Dan Jerusalem hotel in Jerusalem. Lovely hotel, Orthodox Jewish hotel. And on day 5, we visited many of the sites in Jerusalem. Let's have a look. We went to the Mount of Olives first. This view that you see, it's another view of the Mount of Olives, shows again the 2 mosques, but also the southern steps. So this area here, which is an area of archaeology, and we have that opportunity to go and visit that and do worship on there. So fantastic. And the road to the Dung Gate, which goes up here. This is the road to the Dung Gate being just up here. The Jewish cemeteries in the foreground. On the left is the Kidron Valley, and on the right is the Garden of Gethsemane. The Mount of Olives is actually a 2-mile long ridge with 3 summits. We were on the 3rd summit here. The Bible describes David as fleeing across the Kidron Valley and up the Mount of Olives to escape his son Absalom. So coming from here across the Kidron Valley and going up the Mount of Olives. Solomon built his temples to the foreign gods and his wives on this place, and of course Jesus spent time here with his disciples, that we know that from Matthew and Luke, whilst also coming here on the night in which he was betrayed in Matthew 26. Finally, Jesus is said to have ascended to heaven from here, according to Luke in the book of Acts chapter 1 verse 9 to 12. So a very historically significant place for us those of us who love the Bible and love to read it. Palm Sunday, the Palm Sunday route goes from the Mount of Olives, where we were, all the way down past all the tombs of the modern Jews and the tombs of the prophets, and makes its way past the Garden of Gethsemane, through the Kidron Valley and up to the Dung Gate entry today. But in the time of Jesus, he would have actually gone from Gethsemane up to and entered through the East Gate, which is this gate that you see here. This, unfortunately, this is now walled up, and it's been walled up permanently, on and off, right throughout, but permanently since the 15th century, with a cemetery in front of it, done by the Muslims in order to prevent it from ever being opened again. So, the reason that they closed it is that it is said that the Messiah will re-enter Jerusalem when he returns through these gates. So, but of course, if Jesus entered through these gates, we know that it's already happened. The Messiah has already returned. So the tombs, this is said to be where the tomb of Absalom was, and there are other tombs of the prophets in this area here. So Jesus would have walked past this space to go up to the East Gate. The Garden of Gethsemane. The current location is situated at the foot of Mount Olives, with most of these trees dating back to some time of the Crusades. You can see they're quite old. They're hollowed out because as it ages, it loses the center and it continues to grow on the outside, which is an interesting thing. There is a possibility that a few of these date back further, perhaps as much as 2,000 years, though probably not to the time of Jesus, because history tells us that the Romans stripped the gardens of all of its trees and used the wood for firewood and as siege equipment during the war of 68 to 70 AD. So the garden is actually not accessible to the public for all that. There is a small path there that's for the gardeners. There is a path that goes all the way around. You can just see the people there in the background. It was quite a crowded day. It is next to a church called the Church of All Nations, which was built over the traditional site for what was called the Rock of Agony, which is inside the church. Unfortunately, at the time that I visited, there was a church service in progress, so it was impossible to go up and just have a look at the rock itself. But from there we went to Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the name for the World Holocaust Remembrance Center in Jerusalem. And it literally means, the word means a memorial and a name. And it is taken from the book of Isaiah 56 verse 5. To them I will give within my temple and its walls a memorial and a name, better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. I took no photos in the museum itself. It's a very powerful museum to visit and absolutely would recommend it. I just took these two photos outside. The first is the image of a young boy who was killed during the Holocaust, age 2, at the entry of the Children's Memorial. The second is the vision that greets you once you've made your way through the museum, and it is the image of hope, and it overlooks Jerusalem. It's a very moving exhibition, and while we're visiting, it will actually move you to tears. It's stunning. Very good. The City of David today is actually an open-air museum. It is the site of the palace, the house of Caesar that David built, that we read about in 2 Samuel, the image number 2. That's this image here, the remains of which can be found. Though I must say that not all scholars agree with this designation. Archaeological evidence, though, has been found on the sites that dates back to that early 10th century BC, the time of David. So the third photo is the part of a stone wall structure possibly erected at the end of the 13th century BC, perhaps dating back to the Jebusites, so quite a long time, even before David. It shows evidence of burning, which is consistent, so there's this black charring everywhere, which has been consistent with the destruction of the city during the Babylonian captivity in 586 BC, and layers of ash were found, and below one floor the remnants of Israelite and Babylonian arrowheads. So quite exciting to be able to visit that and see that archaeological evidence. Also found in the debris are some of the bullae. Now the bullae are the clay seals that sealed off the documents and the scrolls with the names of known people from the Bible, such as I'm going to get this name wrong, Gemariah, the son of Shaphan, from the court of King Jehoiakim, so at the time of the Babylonian captivity. So we read of that in Jeremiah 36. I returned to this place, the City of David, the museum, because this is where the Hezekiah tunnels were, and also the Pool of Siloam. And then from the City of David, we walked up to the Western Wall, also called the Kotel. Entry to the plaza is through the Dung Gate, as I showed you. The lower courses of the stone that you see here, the really big stones right at the bottom, they date from Herod's Second Temple period. Above them are the stones of the Islamic rule, which are the smaller. So you've got these stones are Herod, and you've got these stones from the Islamic period. And above that, this is the building of the mosque. These were done at the time that they built the mosque over the top in 600 and 700 AD. And then above that is the Ottoman Empire. To pray at the wall, the women go here to the right and the men go here to the left. To pray, so the women walk this way, you approach the wall, you place your slips of paper into the grooves and the spaces that are available. Then you place your hands and your forehead against the wall and say your prayers. On leaving, it is tradition that you take the first 7 steps backwards as a sign that you will not turn your back on the temple. And then you go and wash your hands, the insert there is of the washing fountain, and that photo is courtesy of Amy Connor, who was also on our tour. That evening we went to the Friends of the Zion Museum. It's a beautiful museum with a unique digital experience, beautifully rounded off our day, and it tells the story of those who contributed to the making of Israel and making it a reality as a nation in the late 19th and early 20th century. Day 6, and we started the day with worship and teaching at the southern steps of the temple, and our teaching was done. One of the things was by Allison from the podcast, and she did a teaching there on the names we call ourselves. Beautiful teaching. Let's have a look. So the southern steps, you can see them here, have been dug out, and like I said, we did a beautiful teaching there. It shows you the southern wall of the mount, the Temple Mount, and the steps leading up to what used to be a double gate here. You can see the remains of one here, but of course all of this has been blocked off with the building of that mosque at the top there. We then went to the Church of the Upper Room, which is here. This is the church that's been built over the place where the Upper Room is said to have been held, which is was in an area of the Essenes of Jerusalem. And that's an interesting story. If you have a read in the Bible where Jesus sends them to find the place where the Upper Room would be held, where it was all ready for them. Remember that he says, follow the man having the water. The Essenes had no women, and the reason that it was a man carrying the water, which was unusual in itself because only women carried water, is because the Essenes had no women. So hence they are fairly certain that it was the Essenes, the place of the Essenes. This is inside the Upper Room. The pavement, of course, dates back from much later, where, and the church, this is that church, inside that church. And then through that, here is the tomb, or the monument built over the tomb where traditionally David was buried. So it was interesting to visit. This is a Jewish place of worship now. Women, again, on the left, men on the right. And then we went to the pool of Bethesda. And you can see here the remains of the 2 pools where Jesus healed the lame man. And then we walked in the footsteps of Jesus in his last day, in his last hours on the last day. We started at the Antonia Fortress. We went down. There's a church over the Antonia Fortress now. We went down into the Church of the Condemnation. The floor there has evidence of Roman soldiers' games carved into it. This is the street just outside of the Antonia Fortress where it is said that Jesus was condemned, and where he begins his journey to the cross. The second photo is of the Via della Rosa. It's the Via della Rosa today. The Via della Rosa is the path that led from this place of the condemnation and to the Damascus Gate, and then to the place of the tomb and the cross. So the third photo is the lower gate, is the actual original Damascus Gate. The upper gate is not. Just to give you that perspective of how small that gate would have been through which Jesus would have exited the city on his way to the cross. Day 7, We started the day very early with our trip to Masada. The photo here, though, is of Jonathan Allen leading worship at En-Gedi. Oh my goodness, it was amazing. I just loved the worship that we did each day, and Jonathan did a fantastic job in leading us in worship. The Masada, I have 176 photos of the Masada, and this one doesn't even begin to do it justice as an overview of this place. It is a massive fortress overlooking, and this, what you're seeing here is the remains of one of the palaces. There are a number of them that were built on this place, including a church. There is there's some debate on whether there is any direct biblical significance to the Masada. It's a very rugged natural fortress in the Judean desert overlooking the Dead Sea, although some scholars do think that this may be in fact the location of the stronghold, and it does make sense, where David hid in 1 Samuel chapter 24. However, it is historically important because this is actually the first place that was fortified by one of the Maccabean kings in the 1st century BC, as part of their making sure that Israel became a nation in its own right, which it was for about 100 years under the Maccabeans before the Romans came in and overtook it again. Now, towards the end of the Second Temple period, Herod the Great in 3020, and the Great only because he did a lot of building, not because he was a great man. He wasn't. He was really quite evil, but he did rebuild the temple. He did rebuild Masada. He did build Caesarea, and so on. Herod the Great built palaces on the Masada, but towards the end of the Second Temple, Jerusalem time in 66 and 274 AD, the Masada became the base for the rebellion against the Romans. And even though it is up high and almost unreachable, the Romans were able to build an enormous siege ramp, which the evidence of which is still visible today, to invade the massive mount. And rather than be killed, the 960 or so inhabitants committed suicide. Only 2 women and 5 children escaped by hiding in one of the water wells. Now we know the final story from the work of Josephus, who is said to have interviewed these women. And then we went to En-Gedi and Qumran in the desert area around the Sea of Galilee. The photo on the left is En-Gedi. The photo on the right is Qumran. The En-Gedi is where David wrote quite a number of his Psalms, for example, 57 and 142. Of course, it is also the story of where David confronted Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 24. And photo 2 is the track up to the caves at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were in fact found. Although those caves are now no longer accessible to the public because of damage. And then we went to the Dead Sea. This is Kalia Beach at the Dead Sea, and yes, I did go down to the beach and I did float in the Dead Sea, which is an amazing experience. And the Dead Sea is actually mentioned a number of times in the Bible, and the very first mention is, again, it's in Genesis, and it's in Genesis chapter 14 verse 3, called the Valley of Siddim, meaning the Salt Sea. So there you have it. We went then to Bethany, beyond the Jordan River, and this is in fact the place for so many events in the Bible, including the crossing of the Israelites in Joshua chapter 3 and the baptism of Jesus, as just 2 examples. There's a church there, of course, and many of our group were baptized here, although the waters are incredibly, incredibly muddy. We went to the Western Wall tunnels as they're excavating them to try and find the furthest extent of the Western Wall. So this is an extension of that Western Wall that is visibly in the public arena on the plaza. This continues for another 300 meters. Most of this bottom section here was built by Herod, and this stone that you see here is not concrete, is one single stone. It is 13 meters long and it weighs over 500 tons. This is built by the Muslims, and of course the mosque is on the other side of that. But at the bottom here and towards one side, you can actually go to the place where they estimate is the place that is the closest to where the Holy of Holies was. So this was in the evening, and it was a great way to yet again end our day. We then went to the garden tomb, day 8, and we did some more of the places where Jesus visited on that day. And this was actually our final day, so it was great to just be able to do these final things. The garden tomb was first, and yes, it is one of 2 possible places where Jesus may have been buried. The entrance that you see here, in fact, that's the original entrance. It stops there. This bit here was added, we know, by the Crusaders when they came. The place where this tomb was found was in fact a garden, a vineyard, and it has been excavated on the side, and you can see the remains of a vineyard press there. The other interesting thing is that it is also outside of the city, and it is through the Damascus Gate near the road that leads north to Damascus. So that's in itself is one of the reasons why they do think this may have been the place. The other place, of course, is where now the Church of the Sepulchre is. I did not visit that, which is in Old Jerusalem City. I didn't visit that. I didn't take that opportunity to visit that this time round. Hopefully when I go back to Israel, I will be able to go and visit that. The other reason why they think is because this is also a place known as the place of the skull. Now, the skull, because this is the forehead here, this is the nose, and you can just, visible here underneath is its mouth. The rest of the nose was actually broken off in the late 1940s, and the mouth is now covered by a fence because there is a bus station right underneath it. But this place does resemble the skull, and there is some evidence of crucifixions having occurred here as the road to Damascus went in front of it. Now, this was common practice to crucify and kill people by the roadsides. That has been found all over the Roman world, including in places like England, because it was very common practice for the Romans to do so, because crucifixions, particularly in this place, were a deterrent for those who were passing by. So they were a public spectacle. So when you see images of Jesus being killed on the top of the Mount of the Skull, no, it would have been in front of the place of the skull, so along the roadside, so that people could see and mock, but also be deterred. We then went to Caiaphas's house, the place where Jesus was taken after his arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, of course, with a church on the top, but you see the remains here in this first photo at the bottom of it. It was a palace, which makes sense because Caiaphas would have been a very important person. He would have lived in a palace, and underneath the palace have been found the dungeons and the remains of pits where the prisoners were held, including the rings on the walls that would have chained up the prisoners, and that would have included Jesus. And here you see this is a round hole that was carved by the Crusaders to look down onto the place, one of the pits where prisoners were held, and probably Jesus was held as he waited for the small group, elite of the Sanhedrin, to come together so that they could hear. Remember, it was not the whole of the Sanhedrin, but it was a small group, subset of the Sanhedrin, that then heard him in Caiaphas's house. And just outside is a monument to Peter, because we know that this is where Peter denied the Christ. Now, on the final day in the afternoon, we had some free time and we had options to do, go and visit the things that we had missed and that we hadn't seen. But I love the Old Testament. For me, I really wanted to go and see the tunnels. Others of our group went to see the Church of the Sepulchre. I chose to do the tunnels. There are, in fact, 3 tunnels altogether. And they date back probably to the Canaanite times and the Jebusites. In fact, the one in the middle is from that time. It's very narrow. I took a photo of Alyssa in it to show you just the width of it, and it is just 60 centimeters across, so it's quite narrow, and you can see the water on the bottom of it. This dates back probably to the Canaanite times. Tunnel 2, which is this one here, in fact, is an extension of it and has water to about 70 centimeters, and this is the one that Hezekiah built in 2 Chronicles chapter 32 to ensure the water security against the Syrian attack. And it brought the water from the Gihon Springs, which is at the beginning of this tunnel, and Gihon Springs are of course important because this is where Solomon was, and I mean the Gihon Springs are now completely buried. You cannot see them from the top at all. They're all the way underneath. And this is where Solomon was crowned king of Israel, and where he was led on a donkey by the then priest Zadok. Tunnel 3 is the remains of Herod's water tunnel, which actually ran under the street from, again, the Gihon Springs to the Pool of Siloam. It's 500 meters long, and yes, we walked it, and at times it is 1 meter in height, so it is almost crawling through in places to get through. And it leads to the Pool of Siloam. And it was just such a pleasure to visit this. This is a fairly new excavation found in, and the extension of which is only just being excavated now, and they think will be finished in about 5 years' time. So I look forward to hopefully returning one day to have it all finished. And this is where Jesus healed the blind man in John chapter 9 verse 7. It is at the beginning of the temple, the walk up to the temple. This is where the Jews, including Jesus, would have come. They would have purified themselves by bathing in the water before going up to the temple to worship God. And that was the end of our tour. And this is our tour group, the entire tour group. It was such a privilege to be able to go and visit Israel with these people, being led by Lisa Harper, Dr. Jim Howard, who is in the middle of the photo there, worship and teaching also by Allison, and then worship led by Jonathan. It was absolutely fabulous. I believe they're planning to do it again, so I will definitely recommend doing this with them. So thank you for listening to my slideshow, and I hope you really enjoyed it, and I hope you just learned a little bit from it and got some context out of it.